Hello everyone. What I'd like to talk about today is texture in writing. I often find when I'm talking with other writers about texture that it takes us a few minutes to come together and understand what I mean by that expression texture. It's not new, it's nothing that I've created, and there's already plenty of things written about texture. But I think more commonly, when as writers we're learning the skills of the trade, each of the things which are included within texture we tend to pick up from other writing techniques, and we don't really hold on to this overall idea of texture typically. And I think it's important that we do hold on to it because there's some fundamental skills involved in the creation of good texture. And one of the fundamental things we need to remember is that stories are about people. Stories aren't about places or things. Stories aren't about things that happen. Stories are about our characters and their feelings and the way they interact and the way our characters will react to the things that happen to them. And when we create stories where our characters behave in that kind of way, we're starting to create characters that our readers want to engage with because the characters feel authentic, and as readers we start to care about those characters. Texture creates realistic feelings that explain why things are happening in their unique way, and it allows our characters' lives to interact in a way that forms an artistically beautiful expression of the story that we want to tell. On the internet I found this definition of texture from Gail Gamer Martin, and Gail said, "Texture is a layering and deepening of the colour of the story using vivid language, strong emotion, dynamic characters and plot lines that build one conflict point on another. Texture is meant to be felt. We want our readers to feel the weave and enjoy the tapestry of the story because they can sense where the threads are knotted together and where they overlap. They aren't snagged or created happenstance but form a clear and beautiful picture." I think that's a lovely definition of texture, and what I would like to do now is to use a few passages from books which I really love to illustrate some of the aspects of this concept of texture that I'm talking about. And the first one I've chosen to share is from Stephen King's 1978 book, The Stand. And in this passage, Mother Abigail is waiting for the company, this is a group of survivors, the company to arrive who are going to oppose the man with no face that Mother Abigail is scared of. So here's what Stephen King wrote. "She never saw him. She didn't have to see him. He was a shadow passing through the corn at noon, a cold pocket of air, a gore crow peering down at you from the phone lines. His voice called to her in all the sounds that had ever frightened her. Soft, it was the tick of a death watch beetle under the stairs, telling that someone loved would soon pass over. Spoken loud, it was the afternoon thunder rolling amid the clouds that came out of the west like boiling Armageddon. And sometimes there was no sound at all, but the lonely rustle of the night wind in the corn. But she would know he was there, and that was the worst of all, because then the man with no face seemed only a little less than God himself." That passage, I think, and the construction of the prose is a lot more complicated than the style that Stephen King usually uses in his writing. For this book, The Stand, Mr. King, I think, set out to create a tone which sounded biblical, it sounded prophetic, and this passage sort of reflects his need for that sense of place in his story to be created. But where's the texture? Well, there's a few things that I'd like to call out. Firstly, there is the slowly building tension as Abigail talks about all the different ways that the man with no face frightens her. And in the book, we've already started to care a bit about Mother Abigail. And if we're reading about things that frighten her, then those things are going to start to frighten us. Mr. King also makes a careful choice of simple but rich words, and they have a texture, as certainly as we say them out loud, and if we imagine them as we're reading them, this texture starts to appear in our imagination. And he uses words like gore crow the tick of a death watch beetle, thunder rolling like boiling Armageddon, the night wind. And these words show that she has no respite by day or night in fair or foul weather from her nemesis. And I just think that is a very atypical Stephen King passage, but a very good example of how the choice of words can create a sense of tension and texture. My second example comes from Martin Smith's 1981 book, Gorky Park. And in this passage, he evokes a strong feeling of what it might feel like to be a Russian. I'm just going to read it. We need to know, in fact, here that the character Arkady is a very senior investigator in the Moscow militia. The other investigators were leaving, putting on their homebound expressions and pulling on their coats. Their earnest coats, Arkady thought, as he watched them from the top of the stairs. They're better than a worker's Soviet cloth. He wasn't hungry, but the activity of eating appealed to him. He felt like a walk. He got his coat and went out. He walked south all the way to the Paveletsky train station before his legs took him into a cafeteria where there was a buffet of white fish and potatoes awash in vinegar. Arkady moved to the bar and ordered a beer. The other stalls were occupied by railroad workers and young soldiers quietly drunk on champagne, sullen faces between malachite bottles. A slice of bread with butter and sticky grey caviar came with Arkady's beer. "What's this?" "From heaven," the manager said. "There is no heaven." "But we're there now." The manager smiled with a full set of steel teeth. His hand darted out to push the caviar closer to Arkady. "Well, I haven't read today's paper," Arkady conceded. I think you'll agree that there's a whole lot of unusual for a Westerner culture going on in this story. Where in particular do I think is the texture? I think it comes from the focus on small details that convey this sense of culture. The homebound expressions in the first paragraph, to an extent I think, remind us of the story of Ivan Denisovich and this sense of being worn down in a Soviet state. There's an expression of the inequality in a socialist state when Smith talks about a better than a worker's cloth, better than a Soviet worker's cloth. And then there's the contrast between the vinegared buffet and the manager's gift of caviar to Arkady, because Arkady is an important man. And is it really a gift or is it a bribe? And it's somewhere in between. But Arkady doesn't seem to be disinclined to accept the gift. In my final example, I'd like to go back to 1899 and take a look at Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. Heart of Darkness is a rightly famous book. It's only 40,000 words long, but within it, it's a complete masterpiece of textured writing. I think I need to point out at this point that in today's modern world, some of the expressions of morals and ethical conventions that Conrad alludes to, or sometimes is just quite direct about, they don't fit in the modern world. That takes nothing away from his writing. So I'm just calling that out as it is. Here's the passage that I've chosen. The brown current ran swiftly out of the heart of darkness, bearing us down towards the sea with twice the speed of our upward progress. And Kurtz's life was running swiftly too, ebbing out of his heart into the sea of inexorable time. Okay, so here we have in the Heart of Darkness the story where our explorers have gone deep into the African jungle, up the river, to discover Kurtz, who has become corrupted by his experience of living native with the Africans. And so the piece, which is in today's world unacceptable, is this idea that the black Africans are going to come out of the jungle and do something terrible to us. The brown current ran swiftly out of the heart of darkness. Comrades saying that these people came from a dark, one might consider, bad place. That's how he was writing in 1899. Today I'd just like to call out the way that Conrad uses the words, because the current is running swiftly and it's carrying them away from the jungle twice as fast as they managed in their upward progress on the river. And they're going twice as fast down the river at the same speed that Kurtz's life is ebbing away too. And as Kurtz's life is ebbing, it's carrying his darkness out of his heart back into the river and into the sea of inexorable time. Whether you agree with Conrad's morals and ethics or not, the passage itself is very evocative. If you want to now pick up on this thing as an exercise, the challenge is to write a short scene with two characters who are polar opposites, beginning with the line, "He didn't want to go out on such a night, but..." And in your exercise, concentrate on the use of texture to make the writing as powerful as possible. When I ran this exercise at our writers group meeting, I also did it. I hadn't pre-planned what I was going to write, it just came from my heart, from my gut. And I think that all the reading and preparation for the exercise, from The Stand and The Heart of Darkness, and a memory of the stories about the genocide in Rwanda, came together on that morning to produce a piece that was very dark and yet very powerful. And when I read it out, it shocked the group into silence. And I knew at that point that I actually had to use it again, and I have done now, and it's been incorporated into my current sci-fi novel called Dead Snow. So before I finish, I would like to share the original piece with you, not the version that's been translated into sci-fi. He didn't want to go out on such a night, but the screaming had started and there was no longer a choice. Stepping out into the small village that he had cared about for so very long, the tears in Brother Francis's eyes flickered in the orange firelight spilling from his friends' homes. Moving forwards towards the terror, his heart was torn at the sight of each mutilated body lying in his path. Friends lying dead, their life staining the ground in uncaring pools. Friends awaiting death, their eyes focused on the last moments of life that he could not see. Friends screaming at the pain of their mutilations as they waited for their murderer to return and finish them. Brother Francis saw the evil standing ahead of him, callously hobbling a young woman, grinning with a light sheen of exertion coating his muscly body. "Friend, why are you here? We have nothing for you. What are you doing?" The young man turned to the old priest and laughed. "You shouldn't be here, Whitey." "But I am, and I will protect these people." The man stood straight, marched over to Brother Francis and easily slipped his knife into the priest's chest. "Protect them in death, then." I'm not saying it's good writing or the best writing. I am saying that on the day it's writing that shocked a group of fellow writers into silence. And for me, it was a great moment of texture. I hope you've enjoyed this short piece. Bye for now.